All right, everybody, welcome back to the Rutgers Rant. Politi here, Fonseca. Lanny's done with us. I'm kidding. Lanny's just off. Just the two of us. We were the two out there in Indianapolis for the Big Ten tournament. Quick turnaround. I think I spent 17 hours on the ground in Indianapolis. Not exactly the kind of trip you want. 53 minutes of sleep last night. How was your travel back?
Yeah, it was equally as brutal as yours. To set the scene, we're sitting in press row at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Rutgers is losing by 13, and you're about to press, book on a flight at 6 a.m. And then I'm telling you, Rutgers is going to come back. Rutgers is going to come back. You're going to regret it. They come all the way back. I say, I told you so. And
Yeah.
then they go into double overtime and lose the game. And then you go check
Right.
the flight, and it's gone.
Yes,
And
great
then
work by
like,
you, my travel agent. Thank you. Would have had a better flight. Instead, scrambling to find something. The options were like for $300 to fly out at 6 a.m. And it is, remember, we're booked. It's like 1:30. I hadn't written a word. We're sitting there trying to book this, and that's one option. The next option is like Saturday morning. It's just like God. So yeah,
I
we
mean, I was
traveled.
telling you, I was telling you we could book a car, go to Columbus, spend a day in Columbus, and then fly out the next day for cheaper.
Right.
And then
Yep.
you're like, well, you got to rent the car, and then you got to get a hotel room.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, well, that'll be more expensive.
Yeah, the
I
bigger
felt
problem with that is I am never again going to John Glenn International Airport with you. That was the bigger problem with that. That's the concern.
understandable. Me and John have a special connection that you don't want to get between. And then we ultimately both got 6 a.m. flights
Mhm.
separately. I think you routed through Chicago. I routed through Atlanta. Between us, we touched every state east of the
Yeah.
Mississippi. And I slept, like 20 minutes on Thursday morning and Thursday after the game. And then yesterday I was going to get home and, start doing my breakdown of the season. And then I slept maybe 20 straight hours between yesterday afternoon and this morning. So
Yeah. It was that kind of trip. Um, and the big thing, and this is real. Like I think the game was exhausting. And for us, just the scene afterward was exhausting. And I want to start the pod here because it was devastation. And and trying to describe it to you, we're two of the only reporters there. The Targum was there as well. But we were at the locker room, and I didn't. It's kind of if you don't know how it works, there's a press conference, and the locker room doors open at the same time as the press conference. So the door swings open, and it took me a couple minutes to get there, but you had already gotten there. And so when I walked into the locker room, this is the scene was, and it's a tiny locker room, about the size of my arm, felt just tiny. The players are shoulder to shoulder in a horseshoe. Everybody and every assistant coach, every single support staff people. So there's another 10 people just standing there. And then there's you, and you alone with your tape recorder doing interviews. And I'm like, I just said it out loud. I'm like, oh, this is going to be rough. This is going to be rough. And it was because the players were devastated. It was just a really tough scene. A lot of tears, a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, a lot of towels over heads. I've been in a lot of those before, and they're always, of course, end of the season, there's always a lot of emotion, but it really did feel like the players were devastated.
yeah, so to set the scene, I asked you to stay up in press row to finish my game story when Rutgers was up 4 points with less than a minute to play because I thought they were going to pull through the game. I wanted to be down in the tunnel when they walk off the court and hear them, celebrate to the locker room. So I'm down there and I watched the overtime and double overtime from the tunnel, waiting for the game to end. And it's me and a couple workers in the arena who are just dying for the game to end. They don't care who wins the game. They just want someone to just finish it so they can end their 12-hour day at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. But anyway, I say all this to say I am there at the locker room entrance when it's time to open the doors, and someone comes out and they're like, "It's only you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm the only one here." Like, all right, let me give you a second. They go back in and they come back out, and I walk into the locker room, and I don't know if anyone's ever experienced this. I saw 15 sets of eyes in a dead silent room, all focused on me, and I know these guys know who I am, right? They know what I've written and what I've said, and I'm sure that uh, I was probably the last person they wanted to see after a devastating season-ending loss. But I tried to make it as least uncomfortable as I possibly can for everyone, and I failed miserably because it's one
It
of the
was
most
rough.
uncomfortable environments for everybody. I didn't want to be there. They didn't want me there, and
Yeah. Yeah.
but and listen, I feel bad because we have to be there to ask the questions and they have to answer the questions, but really there's nothing they can say, right? Like, what are you feeling right now? How do you think I'm feeling? It's, it's tough for everyone, but I think to me, what stuck out was just the silence. Like
Yeah.
it was no one was like punching balls, and it was silence with a few tears, and it was just
Yeah.
sad.
That's very sad. Yeah. I mean, a couple of guys actively crying. I'm interviewing Jeremiah Williams, and there are tears just streaming down his face. And I just felt bad, and then I have not experienced that a lot. I mean, obviously you've seen players crying in the locker room, but when he's just he's answering questions as the tears are coming down his eyes, just rough all around. If you thought, well, these guys don't care. They don't care. I can assure you that is wrong. That's a wrong take. They cared. They just lost. And I think the bigger picture is, and I really do believe this, like, it wasn't just the end of the season. I think they think a lot of them really believed it was a missed opportunity too. I did get that sense from some of the older players. I don't know if Ace Bailey at 18 years old recognizes that, well, that was my one shot at college. I don't think there's that, but I do think that the guys in there did sense that this was something that they thought was going to be special, and it was the exact opposite. And it's funny because I know the fan base feels differently. Like from the fans I talked to, there's sort of a sense of relief. I didn't get that from the team.
Someone, this is a bit of a crude example, but I thought they put it perfectly. Someone was like, I don't know if I want Rutgers to win to keep the season alive, or if I want them to lose. It's almost like euthanizing your dog and putting down someone that you just kind of want to put them out of their misery. Again, crude, but I think that's kind of apt, right? Like,
grandma's lived a good life. Yeah, I know. I understand. Yeah.
This was something that you once loved and cherished and you thought about 24/7 for 18 months. Like, you thought this was going to be the most exciting period of your life. And as a Rutgers fan, I should say, if this was the most exciting 5 months of your life, I think I would encourage you to have a more rich life. But I think people were really, 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 really excited about this. And I think by mid-January, certainly by February, people just kind of wanted it to be over. And it is. And now we are in a weird period where we are still kind of breaking down what the hell happened and thinking about, your last question, Steve Pikiell at the podium, where the hell do we go from here? Because I tell you, I look ahead to the next 2 months, 2 years. I'm not really encouraged about what the future of Rutgers basketball is.
Yeah. And now let's just go there, because I think that was the critical part. We can talk about the game if anybody really wants to relive it. I think the game was basically a microcosm of the season. You saw glimpses, and you didn't see nearly enough of it. Had chance to win in overtime, and at the end of regulation, wrong guy taking the shots. I don't know. It was just kind of the entire thing. What I'll say
I do want to say about the wrong guys taking shots. The issue is that Ace Bailey fouls out, right? So he's not around for overtime. It's Dylan Harper and 4 guys who can't shoot. That's the lineup. And there is no right person to take the shot other than Dylan Harper. And if I know that, Eric Musselman knows that. So they just make sure that Dylan Harper doesn't take the shot. That is the crux of the issue for the game and for the season. I think the really part that everyone's going to kick themselves, especially Jeremiah Williams, is that they could have won the game at the free throw line in regulation. Right. I think the fact they made it to double overtime is a borderline miracle, considering all the what I just said. The game was won and lost there in the last minute of regulation. But I thought Dylan Harper was spectacular. I thought
he was spectacular offensively. I will say that. It is telling that the last possession of regulation, Eric Musselman went right at Dylan Harper. Right? That was, to get a layup. He sent Claude right into the paint to score. I mean, that was, I thought that was telling.
Again, I didn't watch it live because I was in the tunnel and my view was a little blocked. But I was told that the Peacock post-game show really emphasized that Eric Musselman essentially cleared out one side of the floor, made Dylan Harper defend Desmond Claude one-on-one. Look, Dylan Harper's not an excellent defender. He's probably not a great defender at this point. He's going one-on-one against one of the best isolation scorers in the Big Ten. That's a hard matchup to ask, right? And kind of we already knew where that was going. So I don't know if that is an indictment entirely on Dylan Harper as a one-on-one defender, but I do think it is telling that was the matchup that USC needs to win their season. That's what they went with, or
Yeah.
keep their season alive. That's what they went. I agree. It is telling.
And it's pretty funny. Just this, and no one wants to hear the process of how the journalism is made. But Brian looks at me and goes, "Hey, the story's basically done. Can you just fill in the blanks and hit send on it?" And I'm thinking to myself, "There's no way. There's 2 minutes in this game. There's no way it's going to be as easy as that." And she goes downstairs, and I'm watching it. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure what you wrote here is not going to hold up there, Brian." It was funny. Just good.
There was a
good,
minute
good
left, and they
journalism
were up. They were up 4 points.
time.
I
Yeah.
thought, look, in my defense, they should have pulled it out.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
So
Yes.
I was right. I had the right idea. I just, it just didn't happen. And I did offer to sprint back up to the press box to finish my story, and you told me just to stay down there because it was midnight. But no one really cares how the sausage is made. I agree there.
Yeah, good times. All right. So the post-game press conference, and again, it was one of these sessions where I just was really curious. Like, I've been waiting for something that I shouldn't have been waiting for. Like, I just thought there was going to be a moment during this thing where Steve Pikiell was going to say, like, "Hey, look, this didn't work out. We gave it a shot. We did," and just explain and just be honest about what happened. Like, I thought there was going to be a moment, and this seemed like the right moment to do it. At the end of the season, you're 15-17. You just lost this game, and instead, it's just the opposite. Like, he does acknowledge, like, "Look, this hurt. I get it. Disappointment. I own it." He does say that, but then, I ask him a question like, "Where do you go from here?" And your answer is essentially, 28th ranked recruiting class. I mean, Rick Pitino doesn't even recruit high school players anymore. 28th ranked recruiting class. 78 sellouts. A lot of good things happening here at Rutgers. I could be wrong, and I don't like to speak for Rutgers fans. I just got the sense, like, is that really what you want to hear? No, I think I wanted to hear, like, "Hey, look, we gave it a shot. We didn't have the resources. We made mistakes." I don't know what it is. Something that wasn't, bragging about how well you practice. You guys should come to. I wish you could see these guys in practice. Everybody practices, Steve. Like, I don't know, like, what it was just really, again, I just was sort of just exasperated. And I get the sense that the fans who saw it, who hadn't given up, an hour earlier, much less a month earlier, felt the same way.
As I said, there are people that looked at this season as a beacon of shining hope for 2 years, 18 months. The moment Ace Bailey committed, people thought this was the season to end all seasons. And it should have been, right? And it wasn't. It wasn't. I think the only way to properly move on from this and evaluate it is we all agree on the basic premise, the objective reality, which is this was a failure of epic proportions. This was the biggest failure in the history of Rutgers athletics. We cannot disagree on that. It is indisputable.
But people do disagree. And that's the funny part about this. Like, I saw some spin on social media. There are people putting it out there. I was like, well, it wasn't that bad. I mean, they did finish 11th. I totally agree with you. Like, I'm stunned. Like, that was not what I was expecting, to wake up after the end of this season and have some people try to tell me, well, it wasn't all that bad. I totally agree with you. And because of the expectations, because of those two players, because of this once in a lifetime shot, it's not like, all right, well, it could have been worse. They could have finished 16th. No, 11th that was not, you didn't sniff meaningful games in March. You didn't come close to it.
They sniffed meaningful games in February. Steve, let's think about this. They have 2 5-star freshmen who are going to be picked in the top 3 in the NBA draft. This is Rutgers basketball, who has not had an NBA player in decades. Right? I mean, Quincy Dubé had a cup of coffee. We're talking about potential top 10 NBA players at some point in the near future. And they went 15-17. They have 2 NBA players. They went 2 games under 500. They have 2 NBA players. They finished with the same exact record as last year's team. That is a failure. Steve Pikiell, the furthest he went in acknowledging that is saying it's on me, but in a generic way, not in a I messed this up way, but in a I'm the head coach of this program. This program didn't meet expectations. It's my fault by default. And the only honest thing I heard him say was that I have to live with this. That's the truth. He has to go down as the coach that no matter what he does at Rutgers successfully, he will always be the coach who had a losing record with 2 NBA players. And once we acknowledge that reality is when we can kind of understand what went wrong how they messed this up and how they have to fix that going into the future. But to start throwing out these things that don't matter, I don't care how hard they practice, because every team practices hard. And if they were that good in practicing, maybe they would win some games, right? Steve says all that matters is the result. Well, yes. Do you practice to lose the games? I don't think so, right? Second of all, the 28th recruiting class is false. I have not found one recruiting service, unless they have the internal recruiting service that evaluates every recruiting class. That's 28th. They're not a top 30 class, but that doesn't matter. They can have a top 15 class because they just had the number 2 recruiting class in the country and went 15-17. Like, what's so frustrating for me, and I imagine it's so frustrating for fans, is that it feels like there's just sand being thrown in my eyes and people telling me that the sky isn't blue. Like, it's insulting. It is so insulting that no one could acknowledge what happened directly in front of us. And I know I had this rant after the 3.2 GPA thing. It's just the truth. And the sellouts. Give me a break with the sellouts. Give me a break. Give me a break. Yeah. They're in the building. They've seen the empty seats. I don't care how many seats StubHub or SeatGeek or whatever.
Even if you give them the sellouts, this is not the right time for sellout talk. It's just not. Good things are happening in Rutgers. And the other part of this, and I get it, like, I appreciate the confidence. Like, Rutgers is going to be fine. Like, that was the last thing he said. Rutgers is going to be fine in the best conference in the country. Like, he had to add that one more time,
which is not true.
Right, but it's fine. He's going to say it every time.
The SEC is about to break the record for the most teams in one season in the NCAA tournament. They have more top 10 teams than the Big Ten might have top 50 teams. It's not true. Why do we have to just lie?
Right. The second part is at least debatable. Like, they're both debatable. The first part of it, though, Rutgers is going to be just fine. Like, have you seen something to lend you? Like, I don't know. I'm certainly not sure about that. Like, I'm glad he's confident in it. I'm not confident in it. Like, I've seen what's happened to Rutgers basketball during the NIL era, and it's been. I mean, we've gone through to the step ladder again, down to where we are now. This is 3 straight years without an NCAA tournament bid. Each year progressively a little worse. Now, I mean, I don't know. I don't feel great about it, and I get it. They're going to get money. They're going to get $4 million about that, to maybe a little bit more, to buy players. I just read a headline on Twitter. It'll be about $6 million on 3 road to have a top 25 team. All right, so you're already behind. You're already behind whatever that is, and we're talking not just retaining players. You're going to go out and buy them. Now you're going into the portal where you have to outbid. You have to outbid people. Where you have to be savvy. Where you have to be, you have to know what you're doing here. You have to have a plan in place, right? This has been what's happened the last 2 years. It's been grab bag transfer portal. Now we're going to go back in again. You don't have a GM yet. You're not going to have that. You don't have the scouting department you need to do this. You don't have someone who, can be savvy with the money in the contracts. Like, I don't know. I don't feel especially great about what's going to happen here in the next few weeks, even with the extra money. I guess that's what the bigger picture thing that would alarm me if I'm a Rutgers fan.
Steve Pikiell has to say he's confident, right? I wonder how truly confident he is behind closed doors. I think that's, what is he going to say? Rutgers is going to have a rough couple of years, fellas.
Well, of course he's not going to say that, but he is blindly confident when you want to say things like, we're going to roll back this. We got to keep this staff. Other people are going to try to steal our assistant coaches. Oh, okay. It's just stuff like that when he says, you're just sort of like, all right.
I think what we've learned, or some of us have learned, I think it reinforces what some of us knew, is that what Steve Pikiell says in public at a press conference is to be taken with an ocean's amount of salt. Like, it's just, I don't know who his audience is. It's certainly not us. Now, a couple things. Just last thing about the accountability. If you watch Providence, the head coach goes after they lose in the Big East tournament and says he had a pitiful, embarrassing season. The athletic director is going on Twitter, telling the fans, like, me and the coach are working hard to fix this. A fan says, we're angry. And he tweets back, you should be angry. You're rightfully angry. This is not good enough for Providence basketball. I understand it's a different school. It's a basketball-only school. That's essentially their football program. My point is, like, it's not that hard. It's not that hard. It's not going to kill you to acknowledge, like, hey, do what his mentor, Jim Calhoun, said one time famously. I fucked up. I'll say it. Print it. I fucked up. Anyway.
Did he really? That's funny.
You remember the Jim Calhoun I fucked up quote?
I don't. That's great. No.
It was about a player he didn't take. But to your point, I agree. Here's the thing with the NIL, right? Like, they're going to have more money to work with, obviously, because of revenue sharing. So is everyone else. That was Greg Schiano's point. And he's right. And all these programs, you think St. John's vitamin water guy is going to pull back his funding because St. John's suddenly gets to use some of university funds?
Right.
Obviously not. You think Arkansas's Tyson Foods and Walmart money is going to dry up because they have $3 million in? No, it's not. So the market's going to be as competitive as ever, and Rutgers is going to have to do better. They can't do any worse than this transfer hole. That's the truth. Isaac Trotter had a great story in CBS Sports this morning of all the high major teams in college basketball. Rutgers is the only one that didn't get a transfer that averaged more than 7 points, right? That's a very damning stat.
That is
they have to do better, obviously. And now, like, we can get into like the actual practical movement here, right? I had, a story I do every year about who's coming and who's going. And I had a really hard time figuring out what people would want from both sides, right? Like which players would want to come back, which players Rutgers would want to come back, and how that would affect the roster construction. Because like, aside from the freshmen, the two freshmen,
right,
I don't know who they would like really, really want back. But you also have to fill roster spots because this team can't fill an entire roster off the portal. I wouldn't trust them to.
Let's dive into it. I mean, I put a list here. Let's go through keep them, lose them, pay them. Play your typical offseason game that you do when you're with the Giants and the free agents. But now we're a professional thing, so we do this in college sports too. It's just kind of crazy. Which is the number? Let me ask you this one: you could protect one player and one player only. Who is it?
It's a great question. That's a genuinely great question. Now, I will say this. Because we are in an era where every year, these guys don't have 3-year contracts, right? It's every year you protect the guy for next season. There's no guarantee he'll be back the season after, right? Yeah. So you're asking me which player do I think will be able to help Rutgers most next season? I would say Lathan Somerville.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think in both ways, though. I think both next season and going forward, I think he's a building block. I mean, 30 straight free throws for a guy. He's got a great touch. I think the other stuff is coachable. I'm okay with him being a little undersized. I get it. It's not perfect. He did not have a great defensive year. A lot of that is positioning. A lot of that's being a freshman. Get him in the weight room. Get him the traditional. Let's see what happens when he gets here. He came in here, lost 40 pounds. Imagine another summer where you could actually turn that into muscle, transfer your body. I think he's going to be really good. Number one, I think so. You pay him. Like, I don't know what percentage of the $4.5 million you're going to dedicate to starters in this world, but certainly you want to make sure he does not end up on another roster. Like, he's not at Michigan next year. I mean, that's a bad example. You know what I'm talking about. Illinois. He's not doing something like that next year. Number one.
Now, what I was going to say is if you could have guarantees of 3 years for these guys, I think Dylan Grant would be that guy, because I think his potential is that of like by the time he's a senior, he could be, like an all Big Ten guy if he's able to put it all together. But I just don't think he'd be able to impact the team next year at a level where I would,
right.
But he's going to put the resources.
He's number two on keep him. For me,
no doubt. On Lathan, I do want to say on Lathan, like the defense, like some of it is just the fact he's just not. He's 6'9", right? He's an undersized center, and he's not particularly athletic, right? He's not going to block shots with his athleticism. So that's just kind of he's the anti-Cliff. Where Cliff, he wasn't great offensively, but he was so good defensively that he warranted all his minutes. You'd have to keep Somerville to score at a high level, really efficiently as a center, and then defensively, you'd have to find a way to work around it, whether that's really good wings defending or having a 4-man who can, or, move him to the 4 and have a center who can block shots, but you have to work around it. I do agree with you that his offensive skill set is better than any Rutgers center that I can remember. Like, I think he could be, like Caleb Swanigan, like that level of, or someone compared him to Trevion Williams. Like, that's a good comparison. I think he could be that level of a elite scoring center that you have to make up for on the other end. Dylan Grant, yes. Number 2, certainly, I think those two guys are the building block. Like, if Steve Pikiell is going to go back to the style of program he wants to be, that he thrived in, which I think really is the only way that he can be successful, I think keeping those two guys is step number 1 and 2, fundamental to building that foundation. Because if you don't keep those two, you really have nothing to build on top of.
Grant's got a nice shot. I think he's going to be good defensively too. I think he's got potential there. I think he's in the right position. He's got good basketball instincts, I think. He's around the basket a lot. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know I wish I knew what that cost in real dollars here. I don't know, several hundred, like $300,000-$400,000 probably for these guys. I don't know. It'd be a really good question. I'd love to know, because you have $4.5 million to dedicate. They are 2 starters. It might be more than that. Probably is more than that, I would say. Yeah. Keep your own guys. They're going to be on the market for that, I bet.
it's hard, right? Like it's one, you don't know what they value themselves at.
Mm-hmm.
Two, you don't know what their market would be outside of the program, right? Like once they enter the open market, centers obviously are big time. The position between them and high, 3-point shooters and point guards that cost the most money.
Yeah.
But I don't know what his value would be. But you also have to think as Rutgers, like how much are you willing to spend of your money on these guys, right? Like maybe Lathan Somerville is worth 400,000. He's asking for 700,000, and these are numbers I'm pulling out of my you know what? But
we don't know the numbers, everyone. Just be clear.
Right. But I'm just saying, like maybe it's not worth spending the money if it's outrageously outside of your budget. These are very difficult situations and conversations that have to be had. That would be really helpful to be had if there was a general manager in place to have them. That'll be in the future.
Yeah. All right. After that, the next player I want to keep is Bryce Dortch for the same reason as I think he's just got some upside. You would think he'd be cheap. He didn't play a lot this year. He burned his red shirt. So there's some, I think they must believe in Steve Pikiell. They must see a developmental process here. I think he's a guy who would want to stay. And I don't think he's looking for the highest bidder. I think you can get him and for reserve money. Let's put it that way. It's not going to cost you an arm and leg to keep him. After that, I really don't know. And I'm going to go through this list. Like Jeremiah Williams, got a year left. I am ready to part ways with him. And I get he was an important player, ate up a lot of minutes. I just think you have to do better than that. I do. You disagree?
I agree. I think it's better for both sides to kind of part ways. I think his time in Piscataway has kind of run its course. And I think just kind of, there was some vitriol unfairly towards him after the way the last game ended, right? Just the way, people were very upset.
Obviously, he missed a shot. He missed his free throws. I mean, those were just, that happens. I know you shouldn't be mad at him for that. I'm talking about the entire body of work. You just need a better point guard. You need a better guard. You need a better shooter in that position. You need not an elite player, but you need a top level Big Ten player. He is not that. And it's not,
My point is that the bubbling of the frustration over him all season, just the inconsistency, the regression, the boneheaded plays, like head scratching, like the constant slipping, which is a weird thing.
How do people expect he didn't play in 2 years? I mean,
the issue is that he had that really good stretch when he came back from his suspension last year, and he led them to a couple wins over bad Michigan and Maryland teams, and that the thought was that he could be that complementary piece with Dylan Harper in the backcourt, and obviously it just didn't work out because he was not the focal point of the offense the way he was the year before. Anyway, I agree with you. I don't see the upside in bringing him back unless you think that next year can be salvaged. I personally don't. I really don't. So I think that it would be best to part ways. But the issue is that, right, you lose him, you lose Dylan, you need some bodies in the backcourt. And you put a lot of pressure on yourself to get someone in the portal who could be your starting point guard, which again is, along with center, probably the position that commands the most money. And listen, do you really want to be the point guard of Rutgers after watching the offense they run? Unless you were a guy that wants to come in and take 100 shots.
Yeah, it's just all money. Yeah, it's all money and shots. All money and shots. So, right, yeah, I think.
Listen, if you want to go to Rutgers, get a payday, take a ton of shots, lose a bunch of games, I guess. But I just don't. I don't know the appeal, so it'd be hard for me. I should say
toward keeping him. Just be clear.
No. I think in an ideal world, for everybody, he walks, right. But my point is, like, with him, there's a certain floor, right? If he is your starting point guard, there, it won't be great, but there is a floor of like proven he could win you some Big Ten games. Without him, like, there's a complete question mark. Like, they can get a guy that's better than him in the portal. Certainly, I think that's plausible. There's a chance that the situation's even worse without him. So it's kind of a gamble, as I would say.
Right.
But I think both sides kind of understand that.
Right.
It's time to.
All right. Jordan Durkak, he's a guy that I would keep. And when I say that, like, I'm not going to pay him, but I would keep him. Like, if he wants to stay at the right price, I'm keeping Jordan Durkak. But, like, I can understand why he would want to leave. And I think he could be a starter, play a lot of minutes at a, LaSalle, at a St. Bonaventure, at a place out of the Power Four. That might be his best path, but I would want him to stay. He's a guy, the depth guy, program guy, good defender. I think some coaching. He was thrown in some weird positions this year too. One game he scored 27 points and Madison scored guard against Michigan State, and the next game he's not playing at all. I can understand why he he'd feel like he wanted to go too, I'd keep him. Thoughts?
Let's call it the Michigan dichotomy. He scored 27 points against Michigan State at Madison Square Garden, and then he played 11 seconds against Michigan in Ann Arbor.
It's amazing. Yeah.
So, anyway, I think Jordan Durkak and JaMychal Davis are essentially the two sides of the same coin, right?
Mhm.
They are guys who are probably not fit to play at this level, certainly not as a starter, right? And they would get more playing time if they drop down a level or two. Rutgers needs to keep at least one of them. I think you can't go into the transfer portal market with zero guards, except for the 2 incoming freshmen who, again,
Right.
as we learned this year, if you can't win with 2 5-star freshmen, I don't think starting 2 3-star freshmen is exactly the path to success. So I think you got to keep one of them. Whoever you want to keep is kind of, the way these things are going to play out. I think the upside with Jordan Durkak is a little higher because, one, I think he's probably a better player. He certainly has a better skill set offensively, right? He draws fouls better than anybody on this roster, not named Dylan Harper. And there's the off the court thing where his younger brother is a 4-star guard at Colonia. Rutgers is recruiting him. I'm not quite sure where they stand, but I think keeping Jordan Durkak around certainly would help in that endeavor. I don't know if that's worth it, but I guess to answer your question, I think between JaMychal Davis, and who's tethered to the program is gone, right? He was anchored to the program because of Ace Bailey.
Yep.
I'm not quite sure how attractive it is for him to stay for both sides. Though I know obviously Steve Pikiell likes him as a defender. I think his defense is not, exactly all Big Ten level, and his offense is rough to watch sometimes. But anyway,
you're taking one of those two. Which one are you taking?
I think Jordan Durkak, personally.
Even though J. Mike probably played more minutes and more experience in the program, he was the most experienced player in the program coming into this year.
Right, but I think Jordan Durkak's a better player, frankly. I will say though, I think personally for Jordan Durkak, he's entering his senior season, like his last year, and if he wants to play, I think you're right. Going to a mid-major would be the best move for him, kind of like a Derek Simpson level jump where you play more and have a bigger role. He thrived at the low major level, struggled at the high major level. Maybe the mid-major level is more of his level. So it's kind of, again, not only is this a Rutgers decision, right? Because Rutgers is going to have to decide who they want to keep. It's up to the player too, because their personal situation. So I don't know. If I'm Rutgers and I have a choice between the two, I take Jordan Durkak. I have no idea how it's going to work.
Emmanuel Bole.
So if Lathan Somerville stays, I think you send Obole packing, obviously. If Lathan Somerville leaves,
you need depth. You need depth at that position.
You need a body. I'm not sure he's depth, to be quite honest with you. I really don't. You need somebody who,
he was the starter at the start of this year. Can you imagine that?
That is an enormous. I mean, everyone knew that was an indictment on the program 18 months ago, but I mean, the way it played out, it clearly is. Anyway, this isn't fantasy sports, Steve, but I think there's really no world where him coming back is a good thing for Rutgers. I mean, that's just the God's honest truth. He's going to turn 25 at the start of the next year. I don't think there's any, upside there.
All of a sudden, the light bulb's not going to go out at that. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
No, but again, as we learned, the center market is absurd. And if Rutgers loses Lathan Somerville and Obole, they have one incoming freshman who's another undersized center. They'd have to get at least one center in the market, maybe two. And that's a really tall task. At least he fills one box on the 15-man roster.
All right. So in the portal, this is like the portal priorities for me are center 1, point guard 2, scorer 3. Like someone who can score the ball. I mean, you would like the first 2 to do that as well. But I'm saying that as a scorer because I don't think it's position dependent. Like if it's another guard, if it's another, if it's a wing. It's just someone who is a reliable outside shooter and not the outside shooter, reliable Zach Martini level, like someone who's actually elite at that. What are your thoughts on what do you need? Where would you rank it?
Again, it depends on who leaves, right? If Lathan Somerville leaves, you need to get a center. Number one.
I think
totally agree with you.
I think Lathan Somerville stays or leaves. Center is still priority 1. Rim protector, rebounder, defender, in the paint. You didn't have that this year. You need it. You need that.
I disagree. I think the point guard is the priority. Like you need a guy who can handle the ball and run your offense, right? Or whatever semblance of an offense you run. You need someone who can handle the ball and it's pretty important in basketball, I would say. I think because there's no one here on this roster that again, unless Jeremiah Williams comes back, then you have a guy who you can kind of
It's silly. They're 1 and 1A. You're absolutely right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Listen, we're trying to solve a puzzle here where we don't know where all the pieces are. It's like playing chess blind, right? Like it's really hard. But I would say I would feel better about Rutgers if they had a point guard and a center who could protect the rim entering next season. I would like a sharpshooter, no doubt, ideally one who could defend at a decent level.
Can I take it to another level? Like, I don't, if they come back and say, oh, you know, Johnny had a great career at Southwest Missouri State. Like, I really think they need a proven, experienced player here next year. Like, this didn't work out with taking flyers on guys. Like, if you're going to spend it, you're going to have to spend most of your money in the portal. If you've got $4.5 million, you're spending $3 million in the portal, I think, right? To get these guys.
Where's the other $1.5 million going?
Is it going to Lathan Somerville, Dylan Grant? We just talked about it. Yeah, I mean, the guys you're keeping. Yeah, I mean, it's more expensive to bring in free agents than it is to retain your play, I think.
I agree. Listen, I do think, big picture wise, you know, you obviously you have to field a team, right? Like that's priority number one. You have to have enough players to fill out a roster to field a team. I think no matter what happens, I would be surprised if this team is particularly competitive in the Big Ten next year. Like it's a really uphill.
That doesn't have to be though. We've seen it. We've seen this happen. And like, look at Michigan this year. I get it. They have more money. They're Michigan, but
Danny Wolf
Missouri,
is not walking through that door.
What do you think he made?
Danny Wolf?
Yeah. What do you think he got?
At least 700. At
okay.
least.
Well, you've got the money to pay Danny Wolf then.
No, yeah, but that 700. you ever hear of revenue sharing inflation, Steve?
I understand. I totally get that. I know, but you're going to have to overpay. You're going to have to dedicate. You have to spend most of your money on a couple players. That's the reality here. I don't know who those players are, but in order to field your starting five, if you think right now we have 2 starters left based on our projections, 2.5 if Jeremiah Williams stays, which is dicey, you're going to have to go out and get 3 starters in the portal.
Here's what I'll tell you. There are pie in the sky scenarios where programs revamped their rosters last year and they were good. Missouri, as you said, 0-20 in the SEC last year, and now they're in the NCAA tournament. They were ranked in the toughest conference in a long time in college basketball. Those are, stories you aspire to, right? That's like when I was a teenager and I wanted to start going to the gym. I had Arnold Schwarzenegger on my wall. I was like, maybe one day I could look like him. The reality is probably closer to what happened up the turnpike, where Seton Hall had to revamp its entire roster. They lost.
Seton Hall did not have the money. They didn't. In fairness, I understand what you're saying.
Rutgers basketball does not have the money.
They have $4 million.
So does everyone else.
Right. Okay, I know.
Right. Again, so unless there is someone coming in here that is donating money to NIL that I don't know about, they're going to have the same amount of money, maybe less, right? Because the Big East schools are going to have more money than anyone because, yes, they don't have the TV contracts, but they don't have football to pay for. So all of their NIL, all their revenue share money is going towards basketball.
Right. I'm telling you, you're right. I understand what you're saying totally. But right now, the spin I'm getting as a Rutgers fan right now is that the House settlement's going in. What happened this year? We've got it's a new era in college sports. What Ryan Passari told me. This is what you heard. Steve Pikiell wouldn't go there in depth. He should have gone there in depth, but he didn't. But he still talked about it. We got the House thing. He mentioned it. Like right now, if I come back and I'm sitting here a year from now, I'm like, well, Michigan had $10 million. I'm going to lose my shit if I'm a Rutgers fan. They just told you that's the only hope they're giving you. That the 28th ranked recruiting class and 78 sellouts. The 3 things they're telling you. If you're telling me in a year from now they're going to be Seton Hall and they're going to be like, oh, we just didn't have as much money as Michigan did. Holy crap!
There is infinitely more. I shouldn't say infinitely. That's obviously an exaggeration. There is a much higher probability that Rutgers has a Seton Hall year next year than Missouri. I don't think it's particularly close. Like I understand it's the off season and everyone wants to be hopeful. I learned my lesson from last year. I'm not letting blind optimism from everyone around make me ignore a bleak situation. The reality is it's bleak. And you can tell me they're getting revenue share money. My response will still be the same. Everyone else is getting revenue share money. And last year, Rutgers had targets of really good players. Rutgers identified really good players in the portal. They went to Kentucky and they went to Ohio State. and they went to all these other schools that had money to work with. Those schools are going to have revenue share money plus NIL. And even if the clearinghouse cuts their NIL budget in half, they're still going to have more money than Rutgers does in NIL. Rutgers is going into this battle. They're going into a sword fight with a gun? No. They're going into a gunfight with a knife.
Sword fight with a banana. Yeah, I got you. Okay.
Whatever. Again, unless the only path for Rutgers to be successful next year, and I think for the foreseeable future, is if they are extremely shrewd in the transfer portal. If they find these hidden gems that fit the system that they play, and they're able to work the portal better than anyone in some Moneyball-esque way, right? I don't see that.
Or the other way is to get back to what they were doing well. Find a team that is its coach's identity. Play basketball, play defensive, win games, outbeat people with that, beat people with coaches and coaching and smarts and desire and want, all those good college basketball things. That doesn't get you a national championship. I get that. It might get you to the bubble again. Like, there are overachieving teams all the time. I'm just saying that's another develop guys. This is what Steve Pikiell's got to get back to. It's his only hope, that he can develop guys, that he can bring his identity back to this team, that they can win defensively again. That's it. That's his path forward, I think.
Desire and want doesn't make you a better three-point shooter. I understand your point. Here's what to that point. Practically, what that means is building, zagging, right, where everyone's zigging. Building big high school recruiting classes, which Rutgers is doing. They're one of the teams that, they have 4 high school recruits coming in. Rick Pitino saying he's not even looking at 5-star high school players. You bring in those classes. You develop those kids. You spend a majority of your budget, much like football does, in retaining those players over the years, right? And hoping that these guys don't, become stud juniors, all Big Ten juniors, and leave for a payday as seniors. That's a hard thing to do, but I would agree with you that is more feasible than building an entire roster off of the transfer portal.
Then finding guys in the transfer portal who fit that, who fit that model. Yeah, the guys that Michigan doesn't want.
He did a great job with it in the pre-portal era, right? Like Akwasi Yeboah, Jacob Young, Andre Hyatt. Like, those are guys that, Akwasi Yeboah's market wasn't, there weren't teams knocking down the door, but he fit perfectly what they needed.
Great point. Yep.
Now, again, it's harder to do that in the portal era, where like these guys are, everyone is scouting these guys and look, there are teams that are overpaying for players like that, right? Like Akwasi Yeboah was a perfect fit for Rutgers. In today's age, there might be a team in the SEC or Big Ten who don't particularly need Akwasi Yeboah, but they'll spend $100,000 or $200 more than Rutgers just to take him and add him to the roster, and Rutgers can't compete with that. So I think it becomes more difficult to do that, but ultimately, that might be the only path for Rutgers to have sustained success under Steve Pikiell in this modern era.
All right, let's dive into some questions, because there's a lot of them that are tied into all the stuff we're talking about, and I think it'll make for a good segment here. And I said because we must have gotten 6 of some element of who to blame. One was just, if you were to divvy up the blame for how the season gone, who tops the list. I got an email this morning. Why not put the blame on Harper and Bailey? Both are walking away from Rutgers with plenty of money. Neither played a lick of defense. They took bad shots and turned over way too many times. Another one. Do you think the failure this season can be attributed to poor roster construction or just players not playing up to their potential? So let's break it down. I want to assign a percentage to all of these things that you think it might be. That we might, I came up with 5 categories. Tell me if I'm missing any categories. Money, roster construction, coaching. By coaching, I mean in-game development, that kind of coaching, luck and intangibles, Ace and Dylan.
Let's start with the last one. Anyone blaming Ace and Dylan is completely ungrateful and should not be in discussion for any of this. These 2 5-star kids could have gone to Duke, which is going to play for a national championship and is the most dominant team on KenPom in the history of KenPom, or Auburn, which is also going to compete for a national championship and is one of the most exciting offensive teams in the country. They chose to come to Rutgers, which has had 0 success as a program for 50 freaking years. They come here, they put up scoring displays the RAC has never seen. The RAC hosted Larry Bird, that might be the last time the offensive skill of those two players has been in the building. And it's their fault. Rutgers failed Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. If there is a list of 1,000 people to blame for this season, Rutgers marketing gets a bigger blame than Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. The guy who sits in section 201 has a bigger blame than Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. Those guys receive no blame. I don't want to hear about their bad defense. That's insulting. It is so unfair to these guys who didn't have to come to Rutgers. Like, what it's unfathomable to me that anyone would even consider blaming Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey.
All right. So I agree with almost everything you said there. But for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to discount the miracle that it was for them coming here. They are now here. We're judging this team, like assign a percentage of blame. They're here. The coming here is aside. I totally understand what you're saying. I'm still going to put that at like 5%, 5 or 10%. And because I watched the games, right? Like I understand how brilliant they were offensively. You could find 30 clips of Ace Bailey in the wrong place defensively on the court. Like you can find examples of Dylan Harper lying on his back when the other team goes back. They just were not complete basketball players. And I think to ignore that completely, to just say that they were like, we're going to see them in 5 years and they're going to be NBA stars and we're going to go, oh my God, I can't believe it's going to make this look worse. But those players we're going to see in 5 years are not the players out there now. I agree totally. They are low on the list of people to blame, and people who are saying that they shouldn't have taken them. All this nonsense is completely wrong. But to completely say that there was not some growth, some problems, some issues with them, some games they took off. I mean, I'm going to look at the Iowa game where you're just like, oh, Dylan Harper looks like he's, the weight of this thing is worn on him, or he's just exhausted from whatever it might be. I'm going to give it 5%.
An Iowa game that doesn't matter in a season that's lost. I don't care. Okay. I don't care. I don't care if you walked up and down the court. I don't care.
All right, so let's go through.
Name one complete player on this roster. Name one complete player.
Of course not. I'm not. This is why it's low. I'm not. But I'm just not saying it's zero. That's what my point is being.
What would Rutgers' record be without Ace Bailey?
I mean, of course they'd be, instead of 15-17, they'd be what, 10-22.
4-11.
No, they wouldn't. Look at the schedule. Played some terrible teams. It would be 4-27.
The 4 wins are the low major teams that they should beat, right? I mean, they lost to Kennesaw State and Princeton with Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. I don't. Anyway, this is stupid.
And I don't want anybody to say, "Well, Polity's blaming Ace and Dylan." I am not. I'm just pointing out that it's not zero. That's the only thing I'm saying. Very
Fine,
low.
It's not zero. It's 0.1%. How about that?
All right. So what is number one on your list of these categories?
Money. Because roster construction is a product of money. And who is to blame for the money? That is another interesting question, right? I think Pat Hobbs obviously is the number one to blame, I think, ultimately, because he led the department and he sat on his hands for the most important aspect of the modern era. And he
didn't just sit on his hands. He was aggressively against it.
Yeah,
not just aggressively against it. And talking to people worked against it. Yeah, absolutely.
Sabotaged the department.
Sabotaged it.
Hamstrung his coaches to a degree that a lot of places in this country, right? So ultimately, he is the most to blame. Steve Pikiell is to blame as the head coach of this program because, yes, he's working with one hand behind his back, maybe 2 hands behind his back because of the administration he's working under, but this is the season to end all seasons.
You mean from a funding perspective?
From a funding perspective. Okay. Greg Schiano is working under the same department. Greg Schiano is infinitely more of a salesman, right? He might be the best salesman the Rutgers athletic department has ever had. But you got to overcome the challenges in the season of all seasons, right? You did the hard part in getting Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper in the building. You got to help yourself out with the funding. And then, it's the, I guess, like long-term, the donor base. I don't want to blame the individual donors, right? But the fact is Rutgers does not have a deep pool of big donors. They have had decades of, incompetence in athletics, right? That has not exactly created a large fan base and donor base. So, I mean, they're to blame in the sense that they didn't give the money, but there's just not a lot of them. And I feel bad for a lot of these guys who probably are asked for money every year, because it's not like you have 120 donors that you could take turns asking for the money. It's more like 25 donors.
Right. Yeah. The problem I have with the funding part of this, and I'm going to put all of it, and I do believe it is the number one thing as well. I think it's probably 60% of the problem for this. The problem I have is that Rutgers had some money, didn't have zero money, and I do think they didn't use whatever money they had well. And instead of taking, and that's why I think roster construction is a big thing. I mean, your stat is pretty glaring that they couldn't get one guy to average 7 points a game. I mean, and I think because they took four guys. They were throwing. This is their roster construction plan. Is just like a water balloon fight. It's not like targeted. It's just I'm going to throw as many of these things at and hope something hits, and it didn't. I mean, that's it. They 0 for 4. You've got to be, you got to hit one. You couldn't find a single guy. And I get it. I think Tyson Ekhoff was the best of the guys they got. And like, he was, a mediocre player. It wasn't on this level. You've got to find somebody. You got to find somebody.
He broke his foot, whatever. We'll count for that. But
roster construction, you got to find. And then the other thing, you got to find someone who can play. Like the idea and the fatal flaw. Like sometimes we are wrong. We're wrong a lot. We are not wrong about the center position on this team. The world was not wrong. It's like it was like a blinking billboard. They were all like, "Oh, who's gonna play center and protect the rim?" The answer was nobody at the start. The answer was nobody at the end. So like, it's hard to dismiss that as like, it was a big flaw. What money you had to solve one of those two problems, you didn't do it. So
yeah, you got the center that will be remembered as forever the biggest blunder of the season, is just not getting a center. And I understand the difficulties, the financial difficulties. I get it. You got to get a body out there. You cannot trot Emmanuel Bole as your starting center in the season to end all seasons. You just can't do it. I mean, they did, and we saw what happened. But and I agree. They missed on the transfers. That's right. Maybe it would be better to have 2 guys instead of 4, but those 2 guys are a decent center and maybe a quality defender, or they needed to fix a lot of things, right? They needed shooting, they needed the defense, they needed rim protection, and they didn't have a lot to work with the money. But I agree with you that the roster construction left a lot to be desired. Those two kind of go hand in hand. I said if you combine those two, it's probably 80%.
Yeah, I agree. And luck and intangibles, I think the last month of the season, that if you were sitting there behind your laptop in a message board going, well, Dylan hadn't gotten hurt in January, I think the end of the season erased that. They were the beginning and the end of the season. We saw it. They were bad with Dylan. They were bad without Dylan. I mean, I get it. It was a factor. They might have won a couple more games. Who knows? Maybe they're sitting there ready for the NI, rearing up to get in the crown because of a couple wins. If Dylan and Ace had played the entire season, if they had some luck go their way, Steve Pikiell sitting there going, the ball just bounced our way. And that's just nonsense. That is, to me, 2% of it. Coaching is fascinating because people obviously are down on Steve Pikiell right now. Could he have coached? Take the coach, Rich Pitino, take the coach you want. He's the hottest name right now. Give me any good replacement level coach, whoever you want. Would this record have been appreciably different? Not like 15-16. Like, would it have been 20 and whatever? Would it, if there was a different person coaching X's and O's strategy?
Impossible to know. The ball doesn't bounce our way thing is something I hear in a high school coach, by the way. I mean, that's just ridiculous. If you get a coach that could run an offense, like run an actual offense, like not be the most ISO heavy team in the country, and I think they would be better, right? Because the only path to success for this team, as we've established, they just couldn't defend, was to outscore teams, right? This is the most efficient offensive team they've had under Pikiell, but that's because they have the 2 best scorers, pure scorers probably in program history. So to answer your question, I don't know. It's impossible to know.
It's impossible.
I do agree with the central point that the coaching did leave some to be desired.
Right, but well below the first 2 things. It's a distant third on the roster construction funding list of things to blame.
So we can parse through these numbers, right? But I think we'd agree like 80% is roster construction and money, like the combination of the two. Maybe 10 to 15% is coaching. Maybe 4% is luck. Maybe Michigan misses that game-winning three. Maybe Rutgers doesn't start its game against Kennesaw State in a 20-point hole. Whatever. And then 0.1% is Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper maybe didn't switch on a rotation a couple times, and they lost the game 97-80 instead of 94-80. Maybe that's the issue, is that Ace Bailey didn't, he blocked 3 shots a game, but maybe that goaltend really cost him. And I mean, the goaltend against Princeton literally cost them the game, right? So I'm not trying to minimize that,
right?
But again, whatever they might not have played in defense, they made up for it offensively, right? So maybe if you let's say you have a better defensive player at both positions in Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, right? Rutgers gives up 10 points less per game, 15 points less per game. They'd score 40 less points per game.
Right.
So it all evens out, I'd say.
Yeah. The one thing that we're not putting on this list, and it's funny because Steve Pikiell did say it or he didn't say it, but he told Nicole Auerbach of Peacock, because I don't know if you saw this clip, Ryan, but he's talking on there about, his regret. One of the few things he will admit to as a regret was the schedule. And that's not, if you give me a list of 100 things, schedule is not on the list. And they had to schedule this way to pay for the players. It's not like I'm stunned that Steve Pikiell would say it. Like you had to go to Vegas or you couldn't. Like that's where most of the NIL money for Rutgers came from. So yeah, I was flabbergasted when I heard that little clip. So that's not making the list for us.
It's everything else's fault.
Yeah.
It's not roster construction. It's not. It's the schedule.
We have a million other questions we didn't get to. I think we'll save them for a next pod. We're at an hour. The one thing I do want to talk to before we leave this podcast, because I think it's very important, of all the things that happened in Indianapolis, to me personally, the things that really affected me was that I saw 2 Rutgers fans. I'm going to leave them nameless, but one of them is Danny Breslauer. Okay. The other one's Max. I saw 2 Rutgers fans, right? Max and Danny. And they had, I don't want to pick anybody. I don't want to, just in case perspective, anyway. And they had and have you seen this? It's called a walking taco. It's a Frito bag, right? And you have Fritos, which you think that's a good thing. I have a bag of Fritos. How exciting. And then they take chicken and taco flavoring and other taco stuff. And they just simply put that stuff into the bag with the Fritos. And they think that's like a suitable, it's called a walking taco. Were you aware this existed?
So I had the same exact situation that you had a year ago. My girlfriend's from the Midwest where they have walking tacos, and I went with her back home and I was like, what the hell is this? And she's like, it's a walking taco. You've never had a walking taco before? I had it, I think it's perfectly reasonable, pretty tasty if you do it right. Got to probably, when you're scooping out the taco, make sure not to get, sauce and chicken on your fingers. But, if you're able to, if you're not a 5-year-old child and you can eat like an adult, I think you'll be okay.
I just don't think you put anything on a Frito. I just don't. I just and then someone, and then you could do it on Doritos too. Like you would put chicken on your Doritos. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I just think this is another reason why I can't live. I mean, they don't have this here, right? I'm not because someone's going to say, oh, you can get that at the Prudential Center, right? This is like a Midwest thing.
I think so. You've never had like a Doritos Locos taco at Taco Bell? It's essentially the same thing. I mean, it's not a walking taco, but it's a Dorito shell for the taco.
I turned 20. I haven't eaten a Taco Bell since college. Once you turn, you can't have Taco Bell again when you're an adult. Come on,
Steve.
It's bad.
Taco Bell's one of the great culinary institutions of our country.
Oh,
don't poo-poo on Taco Bell.
That's a bad way to end this podcast. Any final thoughts? We did eat at St. Elmo's, though. I guilted you there. I sent out just a text. It's like the bat light and just of a shrimp, just like one single emoji in a text, and you came running over. Got it. We were only there for 17 hours, but damn, we were not going to miss St. Elmo's. And I was wrong. It's not overrated. It's a fine steakhouse.
Thank you.
Properly rated steakhouse. Enjoy.
I forgot how powerful the sauce was when it's in person, right? Because I bring home the bottles and I have them and you feel them a little bit, but when it's fresh, I felt like every cell of my brain was being tickled by like a centipede or something when I had it the first time. Like, it was the most beautifully
Angry
uncomfortable
centipede.
feeling
Yeah.
of all time.
Yeah.
And it was great. We were there. We talked to some Kentucky fans who talked to us about Gavin Wimsatt and Mike Woodson and his gang. Kind of, his team walked in towards the end, and yeah, it was a lovely atmosphere. I'm sure this is exactly what the people want to end. One of the most depressing podcasts of all time is sports writers talking about going to St. Elmo's for the 1,000th time.
We just made this the perfect podcast right there. We're dissing on stadium food. We're talking up a $20 shrimp cocktail. It's just, there you go. We're the elites. We're all that's wrong. We're the problem. Let's reseed that. Forget roster construction. It's me and Fonseca, 80%. All right. Sign off there. Appreciate you guys listening this season. We're going to have a lot of talk about who they're going to get in the portal. We're going to go back and answer all these questions in the coming weeks. We've got a long off season ahead of us until, kickoff on August 29th or whenever it is. So buckle up. Thanks for listening.